The people of Harrowmere whispered many things about Baron Alistair Hawthorne, but none dared to say them to his face. They called him cold, they called him proud, they called him a man carved of stone who neither laughed nor wept. Once, long ago, they said he had smiled at a woman, had spoken tenderly to her, but that was before the fever carried his wife away and left him with a child too small to know her mother's face. From that day forward, the Baron swore himself to silence when it came to love. He would raise his daughter, little Clara, alone in the shadowed halls of Hawthorne Manor, and no woman would ever again cross the threshold as mistress of the house. Yet children cannot be raised on grief and solitude. A nurse was hired, and then another, but none lasted. Some fled because the Baron's stern gaze unnerved them, others because the manor was so lonely they could not bear it. Clara, growing into a girl of 6, grew thin and pale, for though her father loved her, he did not know how to soften his voice or to coax laughter from her lips. He could provide her with tutors and books and fine clothes, but what the girl hungered for most was warmth. It was one spring morning, when the lilacs were beginning to bloom, that a widow came to the gates of the manor. Her name was Eliza Gray, and she carried with her nothing but a worn satchel and the steady strength of a woman who had known both loss and perseverance. She had heard whispers in the village that the Baron sought yet another caretaker for his daughter, though no one believed any woman could endure such a post for long. Eliza had buried her husband the year before after he was taken in an accident at the quarry, and she had been left to raise her 2 small boys on her own. She came not only for employment but for survival, though in her heart she also came with a prayer that perhaps this lonely child in the manor needed her as much as she needed the position. When the Baron first laid eyes on her, he doubted she would last a week. She was not young like the others had been, nor did she flatter him with nervous curtsies. Her brown hair had threads of silver, her hands were rough from work, her clothes plain and mended. Yet there was a steadiness in her gaze, a compassion that seemed unshaken by his cold reception. He asked her if she could cook for the girl, if she could keep the nursery in order, if she could teach the child her letters when the tutor was away. She said yes to all, but then she added, softly but firmly, and I will pray for her like my own, for every child needs not only bread and books but also a heart that lifts them in love. The words startled the Baron, for no one had ever dared speak so directly in his house. Yet something in the way she said them, without fear or flattery, made him pause. Against his better judgment, he hired her. The days that followed were not easy. Clara, wary of strangers, would not speak to Eliza at first. The girl would push away her spoon and whisper that she was not hungry, or retreat to the window and stare out as though the world beyond the manor might carry her away. Eliza did not force her. Instead, she sat quietly, telling stories while she mended clothes or kneaded bread, stories of her own childhood, of her boys, of a world where mothers tucked children into bed with lullabies. Slowly, Clara began to listen, and then, one afternoon, she shyly reached out to taste a piece of warm bread from Eliza's hands. It was the first time in weeks the child had eaten more than a few bites. The Baron observed all this from a distance. He did not interfere, for he had little trust in such things, yet he could not help but notice the change in his daughter. She laughed more, she began to sing to herself. When she thought no one was listening, her cheeks grew rosier, and though the Baron did not admit it aloud, he felt something stir within him as well, something long buried beneath years of grief. Still, he resisted. He told himself Eliza was only an employee, a necessary caretaker, nothing more. He saw the plainness of her gowns, the weariness in her eyes at night when her own sorrow slipped through, and he reminded himself that he did not want a wife, nor would he dishonor the memory of the one he had lost. But the heart is not a creature of reason. Each time he saw Eliza kneel beside Clara's bed and whisper a prayer over her, or when he saw her laugh at the child's little jokes, or when he noticed the gentle firmness with which she corrected her, he found his eyes lingering longer than they should. The first true test came that autumn, when Clara fell ill with a fever that frightened even the physicians. She lay pale and trembling in her bed, her small hands burning to the touch, and the Baron felt the old terror rise within him, the memory of watching his wife slip away in just such a state. He paced the halls like a lion in a cage, commanding the doctors to do more, cursing the heavens in his helplessness. But Eliza never left the child's side. For 3 nights and 3 days, she bathed Clara's brow, sang softly to her, spooned broth between her lips when she could, and whispered prayers so fervent that even the stern Baron could not ignore them. On the 4th morning, Clara opened her eyes, weak but smiling faintly, and whispered, "Mama Eliza." The Baron heard it, and his heart nearly broke. He turned away quickly, not trusting himself to speak. It was in that moment that he knew Eliza had done what he could not. She had given his child the mother's love she had been starved of. And though he tried to bury the thought, a question rose in his mind: what if he, too, could share in that love? But the path was not simple. The villagers, ever eager for gossip, began to whisper when they saw the Baron's carriage stopping by Eliza's modest cottage, where her boys lived under the care of her sister when she worked at the manor. Some said the proud Baron would never lower himself to wed a quarryman's widow. Others said Eliza should not trust a man who had shut his heart so long. Even within the manor, some of the servants muttered that she would never be their mistress, no matter how much Clara adored her. Eliza herself battled doubt. She feared she was too plain, too marked by sorrow, to ever be anything more than a servant in the Baron's house. The Baron wrestled as well. He was haunted by loyalty to the wife he had lost, by the fear that opening his heart again would only lead to further grief. More than once, he nearly dismissed Eliza, telling himself it was better to end the matter before it grew into something neither of them could control. Yet each time, Clara's laughter stopped him, for his daughter's joy was bound now to Eliza's presence, and he could not bear to steal it away. The turning point came one winter evening, when a storm raged across Harrowmere. The Baron returned late from his affairs, weary and chilled, to find the great hall warmed not just by fire but by laughter. Clara sat at the table, her dolls arranged before her, while Eliza and her two boys had joined her in play. The widow's eyes shone in the firelight, her voice rich with warmth as she spun a story that had all three children rapt with wonder. For a long moment, the Baron stood unseen in the doorway, watching. And then, with a weighty exhale, he realized this was what he had been missing all along. Not just duty, not just provision, but family. That night, when the children were asleep, he found Eliza in the kitchen, cleaning the last of the dishes. He stood silently for a time before finally saying, "You pray for my daughter as if she were your own." Eliza turned, her hands still wet from the basin. She nodded softly, "I do, my lord. Every child deserves such prayers. And if she were truly yours?" he asked, his voice low, almost uncertain. Eliza's eyes widened, and for the first time, the steady woman seemed shaken. I do not understand." The Baron took a breath that seemed to carry years of grief out of him. "I swore I would never take another wife. I told myself love was forfeit, that duty and memory would suffice. But you have shown me what I had forgotten. And I find myself asking whether it is not only Clara who needs you, but I as well." Tears filled Eliza's eyes, and she pressed a hand to her lips, unable to speak at first. At last, she whispered, "My lord, I am but a widow with little to offer. I cannot give you riches or titles or beauty. All I have is a heart that still dares to love, though it has been broken." The Baron stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "And that is all I ask." It was not an easy path even then. There were protests, sneers, whispers. Some of the noble families scoffed at the notion of a baron wedding a quarryman's widow. Yet the Baron, once so cold and proud, stood firm. He did not care for the world's approval. He cared only for the laughter of his daughter, for the peace that had returned to his home, for the woman who had taught him to live again. In the spring, the bells of Harrowmere rang as they had not in years, for Baron Harthorn wed Eliza Grey in a ceremony so simple and sincere that even the most cynical of hearts were moved. Clara stood between them, holding both their hands, her smile brighter than the sun itself. From that day forward, the manor was no longer a place of shadows but of light. The widow's boys grew strong and proud, calling the Baron their father in time. Clara thrived beneath Eliza's love, growing into a young woman of grace and kindness. And as for the Baron, he discovered that grief need not be a prison forever. Love lost could not be replaced, but it could be joined by love found anew, different but no less deep. Years later, when people spoke of him, they no longer called him cold or proud. They said he was a man who had learned to live again, a man who had once wanted no wife until the widow he hired to feed his girls said she prayed for her like her own. And in that prayer, he found not only a mother for his daughter but a second chance at life itself. The story of Baron Harthorn and widow Eliza became a tale told for generations in Harrowmere, not of wealth or power, but of the healing that comes when hearts once broken dare to open again. And the message that lingered was this: grief may shape us, but it need not define us, for love, unexpected, undeserved, and unlooked for, has the power to mend even the deepest wounds.